G'day guys, Tom here in the Built Moto garage. It's been a very long time since I've been able to run you through a personal project of my own, so I'm stoked to get into the details on this XS650 Chopper. As you'd imagine, building my own project and not having to deal with client expectations, I'm allowed to try a lot of ideas and test new things that I've been wanting to do that we wouldn't normally get up to. Let me run you through exactly what's going into this. Strap in, it is going to be a big one. Now, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of this project, deeper than what we're going to go here, you can actually check out the first half of this build on a series that we called Hard Work, Fast Bikes, Good Times. We started this project, COVID got in the way and the world went a bit crazy, so the series sort of fell by the wayside while we waited for some parts for an extreme amount of time. So this thing got pushed to the side because we couldn't actually progress it any further. But I'll run you through in detail here just exactly how we've turned a stock XS650 into this little chopper. First of all, we started with chopping the frame and getting the hardtail fabricated. This is a fully custom hardtail. You can get a lot of kits, but what I find quite often is that the standard kits that you can buy are probably about 100 mil too long. So they stretch these bikes right out. What we've done is shorten this one up so it's sort of like a single seater only, and you get that nice flow from the engine onto the hardtail and the rear wheel. So what we've done here is chop pretty much from the down tube on the rear of the frame back, re-braced the down tube and rear engine mounts, and then created this really nice sort of off-kilter hardtail. So with our hardtail, I wanted to utilize a set of XS1 or XS2 rear axle blocks. They were a lot nicer than the later model ones, so I hunted around, found a swing arm that I could chop them off, utilize those to build the rest of the hardtail. We've used a 19mm chromoly tube for the hardtail, so you've got a step down in size from the big backbone here, and then you've also got like a sleeve step down just under the rear engine mount there. This created like a really nice light, sort of sporty chopper looking thing. Having an inch tube or 25mm tube on the hardtail of a bike this small, they sort of always look a bit out of place and a little bit too bulky. So this bike, and we'll get into how much it weighs later, is ultra light. You know, it's pretty sporty feel, so you know, about as sporty as a hardtail can get, but awesome little ride, and having that nice short wheelbase, it's just super fun to jam around town. So that was our first port of call. Getting all that lined up, and then we had to wait for a really long time to get these wheels, but definitely worth the wait. We got a set of custom Jonich wheels, so we're running a 19 on the rear, 21 on the front. This was sort of like a really keystone point of our project. I wanted to have really big wheels and include some nice sports tires, so we've used an Avon Cobra Chrome on the front and rear of these things, sort of like stepping away from that standard Firestone or Shinko more square vintage style profile. Again, sort of came back to being like a little sporty chopper. So we've got the wheels finally on there, and then that sort of unlocked the rest of the build for us. I'll take you through the front suspension, which was sort of, once we've finished the hardtail, that was our next step to make sure we get the stance right across the bike. So the front end was another trick bit that we've used on this project. I got a set of shaved 39mm Sportster fork legs, and then used a Mullins chain drive ultra narrow set of triple clamps. So these are a custom made part that we get out of the US, ultra narrow, and generally you can only run these with a spool hub, no front brake. But we sort of, you know, because we had our hubs custom made from Jonich, we could mess around with the geometry of the hub to make sure we could fit a custom disc brake setup. Before we get into the braking, what we've done here is graft the Sportster triple clamp and head stem into the XS650 frame, and then for the bar clamp, I've actually used a downhill mountain bike set of handlebars and bar clamps. If you can sort of imagine, this clamp here normally sticks off the front of a mountain bike. We've machined it, got it to fit on the top of this triple clamp, set it up and welded it on, and then blended it in and polished it up. Ultra tidy piece. This is an idea, again, I've had for a while, but when you mention that you want to run downhill mountain bikes bars on a client's project, often they're not too keen for it, but something really cool that I wanted to do, and I really like the really low profile fat bar style that we've ended up here. matching that in with a bunch of chrome hardware on the handlebars, super high polished triple clamps, and then our nice 4.5-inch front headlight there. Let's get into the brake. This one's a bit of a tricky one. There was a lot of mucking around to get this to work. So if you want to come around this side, I'll just turn these bars too so we can have a chat about this. This is a Brembo front caliper from, I think it's like a XS650 or something like that. So it's a late model dirt bike. We've utilized the caliper, machined and welded on our own caliper bracket here just to sort of sit that nice and low, and then fitted it onto a custom brake rotor. So we can buy these brake rotor blanks, and then I just jump on my CAD program, design up the hole cutout and stud pattern that I need, and then have those water jet cut before they're machined flat again and stuck on the bike. So when you're able to custom make things like that, it sort of really opens up what you can do on a motorcycle and how you can, make things work. So like I said before, this front end, people don't run front brakes on them. It's a very chopper dude part that a lot of guys use on their Sportsters and stuff like that to run an ultra narrow spool hub. Because we were able to firstly get the custom hubs made, and then we were able to get a custom made brake rotor and then custom mount a brake caliper, we've all been able to make this work really well. And now that the pads are bedded in, and this brake is actually really awesome. The bike is super light, and with the big rear rotor that we've got on it, the braking is sort of it doesn't leave anything to be desired. I couldn't want, really anything more out of a bike like this. So another really awesome piece that a lot of hours in design time went into, and also a lot of hours into sort of going through drawings, making sure this would fit, getting measurements, and just sort of making sure that when we came to put this bike on the road, it was going to work like we needed it to. So now you know everything you need to on the front brake. Let's go through the rear brake. Pretty similar setup here, as we've had a custom hub made by John Itch Wheels. Awesome, super tidy thing. You have no spoke nipples, the clean rim. I sort of bang on about these guys' wheels all the time because I really love the style. So we were able to fit, again, a custom rotor, and then this caliper is off the rear brake of a Ducati Monster 800 or something like that, pretty late model. So we went down to Paolo from MotoGen, hooked up some brake calipers, rebuilt them, chucked them on the bike. We've made ourselves a custom brake hanger. Got a custom stay welded onto the hardtail here. Everything flows really nicely. Again, linked up to a foot pedal, which I'll run you through in a minute when we're talking over the motor. And then on the opposite side of this, we've done a 520 chain conversion. So we could again run super skinny, tight clearances, make this hardtail as slim as possible. And then we're running a 32 tooth 520 rear sprocket. So it's, you got your highway gearing on that. It runs really nice in high speeds. A lot of guys on XS650s, especially when they're doing high kilometers or fast kilometers, they complain that they rattle too much on the highway. So we've done our best to eliminate that, because this ultimately is a bike that I really want to ride. This will be my weekender bike. So wanted to make sure that while it looked awesome sitting on the ground, it could actually, handle the riding that I want to do on it too. Now, while all this weird fabrication stuff was going down, we had Jesse from Purpose Built Performance working on the motor. Now, like our previous XS650 build, the nickel-plated frame cafe racer, this engine was built up to be, a reliable, but we've sort of put pretty much everything that if you were going to race this in a vintage class, you would have these parts in your motor. So we've gone with the 700cc Who's Racing piston kit. These are a really high performance piston kit that we get out of the US. I think they might even be closed now, so lucky we got in before they shut down. A Shell #1 cam, which is sort of like a high performance but still streetable cam that a lot of guys run. Again, like a lot of dudes using this sort of stuff in the US. We've got a set of Mikuni flat slide carburetors, an XS charge digital ignition with a performance coil, new leads, all the rest of it. And then we've gone in and port and polished the head, put a high flow exhaust on it. Pretty much anything that we could do to this motor, we've done it to get as much performance as we can, but keep it, nice and reliable. So I'm not building a hand grenade that needs to be built again in 12 or 18 months time. On the bottom end, totally fresh crank, everything's been rebalanced, new bearings, bushings, seals, all the rest of it. And we've upgraded the sump filter, which is a really common problem on these XS650s. So your sump filter is sort of like a mesh gauze that blows out from the oil pressure a lot of the time, especially after they start aging. So we've upgraded that with a Haydn tuning sump filter, a really good upgraded part, and run a set of velocity stacks. Not my jam usually, but on a build like this, some nice shiny velocity stacks definitely fit the bill. So once we got to finishing the inside of the engine, the outside of the engine needed a little attention. I've had this idea for a little while now, and I wanted to mount the pegs in an ultra clean position off the actual engine cases. So what I've done is brace this is your stator cover. So I've braced in behind the stator cover to allow it the strength it needed to weld a foot peg spigot onto the outside here. So this negates the need for brackets that would have inhibited my exhaust run or just sort of been ugly on the outside of it. So I can get an ultra clean finish on this thing and make sure that firstly my feet were in the right position that I wanted. I see a lot of guys building XS650 choppers with forward mount pegs and just looks whack. So I brought those back a little bit so I'm in a good riding position. It looks nice, my feet are nice and high so I can jam this thing around corners when I'm brave enough. And this is all mounted up. So we've sort of replicated this in a reasonably similar way on the other side. And then this is linked up to the hydraulic clutch conversion. Again, this is something that we did on our XS650 Cafe Racer build. So we've used a Ducati clutch master cylinder, modified this case here and welded a bracing on so we could bolt the clutch the clutch slave cylinder onto it, and then we've just got a custom pin that's adjustable to get the right clutch push that we need. Having a foot clutch jockey shift set up on this bike, I wanted to make it nice and easy, and having a cable clutch would have been ultra ugly. So the hydraulic solution was one that looked better than what the stock setup would have been and will also perform better. Being a foot clutch, and then I've made a nice little jockey shift which I'll run you through now. All right, so my little jockey shifter, having time again, I would probably make it a linkaged shift because the swing on this shifter is quite long, but it does the job. It looks really nice. So all we've done here is taken the spline from the old foot shifter, made up a nice mild steel bar and had that chromed, and then I've hand shaped this on my lathe. So this is sort of matching in with the sissy bar that I've made. I just sort of sketch out a weird design and figure out how to make that happen on the lathe. Spend a few hours, muck around, polish it up, put a thread in it and chuck it on there. It's a bit of a weird shape that I don't really see often. I guess it's, I don't know, like a bit of a knife handle, weird thing. I couldn't even call it that. It was just a shape that I had in my head, so I decided to chuck it on and then shape it up. This all sort of works in, I wanted to make sure we had a lot of like raw metal and polish finishes on this bike. It's not often that we do this sort of stuff. A lot of our stuff is a little bit more sporty looking, so you don't get that like crazy show chrome, but I really like the way that it's all sort of tied together. Again, with this blue paint job, I'm ultra happy with it, and I'm glad because I've got to put up with this bike for as long as I own it. So when it comes to the exhaust, so the engine was built in the frame. I wanted to make sure that I had a really nice looking symmetrical exhaust. Generally, like performance wise, I would have chosen a 2-in-1. I think they also sound a bit better too, but sort of decided to swap a bit of functionality for style on this one. Definitely glad I did. So we've just shaped up a really simple 2-in-2 exhaust that sweeps under the engine out. It sort of follows the hardtail angles towards the back and then ends just forward or just rearward of the rear tire. So this was sort of something that I would put in place. As the bike sat, I started to mount fenders and mock up tanks and stuff. It started to look really short and squat. So the exhaust idea was to sort of like have it, way longer than what it probably should be, but it elongates the look of the bike and helps with that sort of like low, lean street chopper look that I was going for. Ultra happy with it again. Stainless steel, back purge, TIG welded up, and then we've just finished all the welds off on it and brung it up to a nice high polish. As we've been test riding this thing around and tuning it up, the headers have come that beautiful straw gold. So yeah, I mean, not much to say with that. We've sort of tried to hide the mounts and stuff like that. It looks like it's straight pipes, but we've actually got a really nice muffler section in here. So when I start it up, you'll hear how it sounds. It's actually not too aggressive or loud, which is good because I don't like ultra loud bikes. So yeah, that was sort of something that I wanted to make sure that we got right, and that really sort of set the tone for a lot of the other little bits and pieces of fab work that I'll take you through now. All right, starting on the back with our sissy bar. I've handmade a lot, well, not handmade, but I've turned up a lot of these slugs on the lathe. You got your fender mounts, the little like spike mount here that houses the brake light as well, and then also your connection slugs down here. These are some nice like angle cut things that have been welded on. All of this is done in stainless steel and polished by hand. So again, this matching in with the jockey shifter that I've made was just sort of turned up on the lathe, welded and blended in. I sat down, and this is one of the only times that I'll sort of like sketch stuff out is when I'm building sissy bars and stuff. So I sketched out a few ideas and sort of landed on this one, having it stick just a little bit higher than where my bars would end up. And you know, because this thing is so low and sort of elongated, having a mid-height sissy bar still actually looks pretty high on it, just comparatively to the rest of the bikes. This is something that we've started doing a little bit more now, making sissy bars and stuff. Absolutely love doing it. It's a really good like creative exercise, and you got to be super on point with your fab work because it's 100% on display here. So it's good to sort of take your time with this, make sure that your joins are blended out nice, and just create a beautiful shape. It's there for nothing else than to look good, so you got to make sure that it does. We've used a sort of like twin side mount on this ultra nice fender. So I got to talk about this fender. This is from a guy in the US called Joe Cooper, sort of Cooper Smithing. He makes these ultimately cool. They're probably like the nicest fenders that I've ever seen. So super nice shaped fenders. He makes them in the shed out the back of his house in the US. And what we've done is modify his fender slightly. So instead of the rolled mild steel lip, I've actually, and I spent so much time doing this, I actually shaped up some 6mm stainless steel bar and tack welded it all along the rim of this fender, so we could have had that nice finished edge that would be raw of paint, tying in with the rest of the raw metal finishes and also the detail on the tank, which I'll talk about in a sec. This was something that, you know, you got to spend time on the things that you think will make a real impact. So this was one of those things I probably spent like definitely over a full day just shaping this up and getting it all in place. And then once that was done and tacked in place, the gaps had to be filled with some JB weld, sanded back, and then body filled, and then it had to go to paint. So a huge process to get the look that I wanted out of this thing, but I'm really happy I did. So, and when you're starting with a blank that is nice as Cooper Smithing's fenders, you know, they sort of deserve the time and effort that it takes to make them just really stand out. So this is one of my favorite pieces on the bike, is sort of like the fender mount sissy bar and fender combo. Again, just because it's so different to the Cafe Racer Scrambler stuff that we normally do. So I had heaps of fun fabricating this thing. I just come in on weekends and work until it was done. My fiance fucking hated me for it, but yeah, it worked really well and I'm ultra happy with it. One of the things that I didn't make on the rear of this was the fender brackets. So these really nice little sharp looking fender braces that you can see here. This is Dylan's handiwork. So these are just shaped out of a couple of bits of plate steel made to flow really nicely, bolt onto our cross bracing here on the hardtail, and then just have like a nice sort of, I guess, bladed edge on that fender. Again, like super nice touch. I'm really happy with how that's come out. Before we move on to a few more bits and pieces under the seat, I just wanted to mention this tail light. So this tail light, I had like a really small run. I think I got like 6 of them made. It's sort of my play on a coffin style tail light. We just sort of like shaped up this nice diamond shape, had a lens made and machined with like a nice circular pattern. I got a few different lenses that I tried out for this, but again, like just another creative exercise that I could use to, you know, test a bit of my design skill, have something really cool made. Then we've just mounted a nice sort of like light base in the back there on a custom aluminium body with the lens in front. I think like the light spread and stuff like that out of that nice like circular pattern that we've done looks really good. I think probably be a few improvements if I ever decide to make something like that again. But again, just like a one-of-one piece on this bike that we've done. I sort of took the time to muck around and make sure that we got it right. And it ended up, so I mounted it on this bike. It was only going to be the single bike that would ever have this tail light, but I liked it so much, I actually chucked it on our Ducati GT 1000 build, the black and yellow one. So if you look closely, you can sort of see how we've integrated that design into a Cafe Racer tail too, which again turned out pretty nice. Now, nearly everything on this bike took me a long time to do because it was a labor of love. There was sort of, you know, I wasn't worried about time on this project. I just wanted to make exactly what I wanted. So I had this idea for a little weird seat setup for a while because I was riding a hardtail and I didn't want it to be sitting with my spine directly to the road. So I've built in some seat suspension on this bike. What we've done here is make a brace that pivots on your sort of like a standard bait style seat mount. So off of here, you've got your pivot point, and then underneath the seat, you have a linkage. So this is actually like a miniature shock absorber. I think it's probably supposed to be for like a seat shock or something like that. So I got that. I had to go steal a better spring off of Justin from Pop Bang Classics. I think it's like I don't know, a truck valve spring or something random he had laying around his shop. So it was the right sort of spring rate when I jump on it and chuck my weight there. And then I just sort of had to make this linkage. So the idea is that this seat can pivot off of that pivot point, so it moves up and down, and then that sort of movement is transferred via this linkage here down these rods that squishes this little sort of shock setup that I've got here. If you get into some like close detail shots of this, I don't have to explain how long it took you to make. It was sort of like, you know, hours of me just trying to figure out exactly how it would work, and then making it, and then figuring out that probably wasn't right, and then remaking it, and at the same time trying to make it look as cool as possible. So, you know, adding a few details and intricacies that would tie it to the rest of the bike, just so it wasn't this like random standalone piece that I'd made that didn't really fit anything. So overall, I'm really happy with the result and the detail on this. It's always cool, you know, there's been a few people to see this bike when I'm out test riding it, and they always sort of like stare at this section for a while, just trying to figure out exactly what the hell it does until I tell them. If you got a mechanical brain, you can sort of see what's going on, but a lot of guys get a bit lost at it, which is cool. You know, I get to sort of talk people through exactly what I was thinking and how I made it and what it was. So I always love talking about that sort of stuff, especially to nerds that get it like me. All right, more details on the XS Chopper. So we've got a lowbrow banana tank. I've always loved the look of the banana tanks that they make, especially on this sort of like more Brit style chopper, where the tanks, instead of sitting up like you would on a Harley backbone, you can sort of lower them right down. So I wanted to make that sort of fit there. So we've actually modified the XS650 backbone and brought it down a bit so we could have this tank fit flat across the motor, and then molded it in with this nice stainless steel detail too. So we've got one on either side, and then a nice teardrop shape that we've shaped up around the gas cap. This bike was from the very beginning just going to be one color of everything, so we had to add detail in without, you know, changing color. I didn't want to have painted pinstripes on, so we've basically like pinstriped this bike with real steel. That's been welded on, molded in, and finished back by Nathan at Live and Loco. Under the tank here, again, we have some more details. Got a top engine mount here that also acts as the coil mount. So because this tank was so skinny, and I've actually got the purpose-built Moto black box tucked up under there to control your lighting and starter and all that, that's under the tank. We didn't have any room to hide the coil. So instead of trying to do a shitty job at hiding it, I decided to put it on full display and just make a nice bracket to house it. So stainless steel bar work here that holds the coil in place. It's wired nice in some cloth covered wire, and then just, you know, routed as neat as possible. With the Speedo, I've done a custom stainless steel cup. So I made this up on the lathe, welded a few bits of tube together, and just mounted it off the little cam cover here. So behind this cover is the ignition. And then again, like, your cables have a nice neat run. There's not stuff hanging off all over the bike. And I wanted to try and minimize the amount of wiring that you saw on it, which I think we've done a pretty reasonable job of it. There's sort of some stuff you can't avoid, but again, really happy with how that's turned out. The tank is, you know, this was one of the early pieces that we put on the bike because I knew that I wanted that lowbrow, that banana tank style look, and it's so much so that I actually modified the frame to make it fit the tank. I was sort of committed to making that happen. This was sort of what ran into the Cooper smithing fender, and then, you know, everything tells a story against everything else, and it's our job to make sure it works together at the end. So yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with the way that this style has turned out. There's a lot of detail work in here, a lot of time, but when you're building a bike for yourself, it's sort of like, this is putting on display just exactly what we can do and the sort of stuff that we love to make. So yeah, you gotta really pour your heart into stuff like this, I feel like. All right, let's get under the engine here. So Again, more weird detailing work that we've done. I do this on our XSs. Like when we have a really nice XS come through that we're doing the full build on, I will modify the front engine plate, which is a god awful thing that Yamaha stuck on the front of these bikes. Just so happens that our logo looks really good right there. So we customize this, we put some sheet metal across the front, and then generally I'll just hand cut these out. So I'll cut the shop logo and make it sit nice in there. And this one's just been sent out to be chromed. I've also made like a sort of pseudo bash plate here. The reason for this was because we've got absolutely nothing on this bike. This is where we've hid a lot of our electrics. So underneath here, we have the connections for our regulator rectifier, and the regulator rectifier is housed behind this, that's mounted there, and then the cables run towards the back. There's like a little battery box thing that I'll run you through in a sec. So this was all sort of shaped up to make flow, and I wanted to make sure that we included our logo somewhere on this bike in a permanent place. Like, you know, you're pretty hard pressed to get rid of that unless you want to put the factory ugly thing back on there. So let's jump towards the back. I'll run you through the little battery box and our chain runner, and then that'll be about it. We can give this thing a start. Now, as hard as I tried, I had to have a battery box on this thing because there is just stuff that you need to have on a bike. It does run a kickstart, which I use most of the time, but I did include an e-start on it just because I get lazy sometimes when my bike's cold. So we've got our starter solenoid housed in there and a little anti-gravity battery, as well as the key switch and stuff like that. So this is just a bit of sheet metal that I shaped up, made a box, and then that sort of like top shape, just again trying to like flow into that rear fender, make something that sort of fit the mold and match the rest of the detailing that we've put on the bike. And then because we have a very long chain run here, I don't know why it seems so long, the bike's actually quite short. So hardtail, I've decided to just put a little chain runner here. So that just sort of supports the chain chatter, and because I wanted to make sure that my rear fender always had that nice fitment, this is sort of set here, and when it comes time to adjust my chain, I will probably just put some spaces there to add a bit of tension to it, so my rear fender fitment doesn't look like shit when my wheel has to move 20 or 30 mil rearward. So that was the idea with this, to firstly sort of like take some of that chain bounce out, because it is quite a long run, especially with like a skinny 520 chain. So I can add a bit of tension here. So it's a matter of 2 bolts, and then I can just put some spaces underneath, and that'll tension the chain back up to where I need it to be without messing with my fender fitment and gap. Last thing I got to mention before we get into starting this thing is the paint. So like I mentioned before, the idea with this was just going to be all single color, and the rest of the finishes would be raw metal and polished finishes or chrome. So I took it down to Nathan from Livin' Loco. I had a pretty sharp idea on exactly what I wanted, so it wasn't, you know, it wasn't too much design discussion because most of the design is done in the fabrication on this bike. But we sort of threw a few colors back and forth all around this sort of like dark, flat royal blue. I didn't want like a candy or anything like that for this bike. So the color we landed on was a Porsche 356 Speedster blue. This was, I think it was like an early 50s model blue that they came out with. It's also really similar to some 30s and 40s Ford and Buick colors. So that was the sort of color I wanted. It's just like a nice rich blue. Looks incredible against like the polished silver and chrome work that we've got on this bike. Blue's not my favorite color or anything, but when I was staring at this bike sitting on the bench, it looked pretty much like this, but it was just in you know, a rusty, mild steel finish on all the fenders and frame and stuff like that. I don't know, I feel like it just needed to be blue. So I'm glad we rolled with it. I'm super stoked on how it looks. It's best in that sort of like sitting out in the sun, you've got like all the chrome and stuff shining on it, and then this blue just sets it off ultra nice. So enough of me banging on. I'm gonna start this thing up for you guys now. Sounds incredible. This little machine, especially after we've rebuilt it, it's basically a brand new 1970s motor, so it runs super quiet like a sewing machine, except for the bark that you get out of those pipes. And the ride on it, man, this thing is ultra fun to ride. Yes, it's a hardtail. It's not fucking built for cross country or adventure riding, but it does exactly what I wanted it to do. And no matter where I go, I could ride this thing to the end of the parking lot at the shop here, and I'm having a good time. It's just, yeah, this is the ultra bike. It weighs 150 kilos, and with the engine work that we've done, this thing's like riding a BMX with 60 horsepower. Basically, it's so fun. I mean, I hope that comes across in our test ride. So let me start this thing up. We can get it firing. You guys can hear it. Let me even try kick it. Let's see. I'm glad that started. Yeah, listen to that thing. There's no ticks or anything. Ah, yeah, I love this thing. Purpose-Built Moto has built a great community of both riders and builders around what we do. Whether you love our builds, you use our parts on your project, or you're just here for the content that we create on social media, thanks for being part of our tribe. Next time you're in the garage planning out your build, or you're just tinkering around, make sure you jump on to purposebuiltmoto.com, support the cause and grab a few parts for your pride and joy.